The Minds of Meaning Podcast. The Minds of Meaning Podcast. A podcast where we grow together in understanding the unique ways that God has created us. Here's our host, Austin Anderson.
Welcome to the Minds of Meaning Podcast, a podcast where we learn the unique ways that God has created us. My name is Austin Anderson. This is the fourth episode of the Communication Leadership Series, where we are interviewing communication educational leaders within Christian higher education. Dr. Tim Muehlhoff is a professor in the Department of Communication Studies at Biola University in La Mirada, California, where he has served for the past 20 years. Prior to his time at Biola, Dr. Muehlhoff worked with Cru College Ministries for 18 years and still serves as a consultant for the organization today. He earned his PhD and MA in the field of communication at the University of North Carolina and earned his undergraduate degree at Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti. Since 2020, Dr. Muehlhoff has co-led the Winsome Conviction Project. It was launched from a heartfelt concern for the toxic, polarized, and simply unloving communication climate that is preeminating our nation and penetrating the body of Christ. They believe that the followers of Christ are obliged to communicate with others in loving ways that preserve human dignity, even as humans engage in honest and passionate disagreement. They hope to foster conversations within the church and the broader culture that deepen relationships and enrich lives rather than tearing us apart. Two of his books have earned Christianity Today Book of the Year Award of Merit, including his titles Winsome Conviction, Disagreeing Without Dividing the Church, and Winsome Persuasion, Christian Influence in a Post-Christian World. Dr. Muehlhoff is as engaging of a communicator as one can come by. We hope you enjoy this conversation. So you've had a very interesting path to your career role in Biola as you were on staff for Cru for nearly 20 years prior to getting into teaching full time. What led you to consider becoming a communications professor after starting a career in campus ministry?
So I absolutely loved Cru. My wife was on staff for almost 30 years. I was on staff for 28 years. And the entire time we did campus ministry, we kept thinking, boy, we need to get into the classrooms. I mean, this is where students are being impacted. This is an important area. And yet that was almost untouchable for us as campus staff. Very few faculty would bring us in. And so I started to be part of something called the Communications Center. It was a Cru think tank. And as we began to think very deeply about how do you impact other people, especially people with different perspectives, we realized that we need more education. So I went and did an MA at UNC Chapel Hill and loved it. Oh my goodness, talk about ideas just exploding as I was introduced to comm theory. And you teach right away at UNC Chapel Hill. Grad students teach right out of the gates. So I actually got a chance to teach my very own public speaking class. Loved it. I was hooked. What do I got to do this full time? Well, the answer is you got to do a PhD. So I did a PhD and have absolutely loved being a professor, the whole package, not just the classroom part.
So the whole package, just for those in our audience who might not know, what other things are you talking about here?
So the package, both good and bad. I mean, the good is my summers are up to me to determine what to do with my summers. I can teach if I want to. I choose not to. Every seventh year, I get a 1 semester sabbatical. And so there's a lot of time to think. You have to do an annual report every year. And you're measured on 3 areas. 1, service to the university. 2nd, your teaching evaluations. And 3rd, research and writing. So you cannot get promoted if you're not writing. It could be journal articles. It could be books. So I love that built into my job description is they want me to be doing research and writing. So I love that.
You've written a lot of publications and you've been on several podcasts, but something that appears to be a significant passion for you and looking up your bio and stuff on your website is this Winsome Conviction Project. And would you mind elaborating a little bit on what that is and how you become so passionate about the subject?
Yeah, let me just say something about the books that I've written just for a second.
Please.
If I was at a D1 university, they do not care about popular books. Like they want you writing scholarly books and they want you writing journal articles, going to conferences. I'm not opposed to that. But of the 9 books that I've written, 2 have been in the academic brand, right? And the rest have been popular. Now, there'd be some places that would frown upon that. Remember, C.S. Lewis was vastly criticized for writing children's stories. Right? That's not what a professor at a high-level university does. So I love being at a university that values both. So all my books count for promotion. All my books are valued by this university and civic engagement. I mean, built into the mission statement of Biola University, the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, is we want to impact culture. So the Winsome Conviction Project is an attempt to foster civil, compassionate conversations, both with non-Christians, but also with Christians. So my book, Winsome Persuasion, was on how to talk to non-Christians, and then how to talk to Christians would be Winsome Conviction, which is in the popular vein. Both are appreciated by Biola University. And Winsome Conviction, we teach churches, how do you have the race conversation? How do you talk about the upcoming election using biblical principles as well as communication theory?
And so when I read on your website, Winsome Conviction Project is like a 5-year agreement or something that you made. Is that something you're looking to extend, or is that something that you're kind of looking to conclude this in 5-year realm?
So it's already been extended.
Great.
We now have funding for years 6, 7, 8, because it turns out that the world falling apart is really good for business. I mean, honestly, the reason it's easy to raise funds is there was a study done by Pew Research where 98%, think about that for a second, Austin, 98% of Americans would say instability is a threat to this country. And so I think Americans, both secular and religious, feel this. So the Winsome Conviction Project says, yeah, let's be civil. As we disagree about really important issues, let's do it in a way that opens conversation, doesn't close it.
I love that. You're the fourth of 5 people I'm interviewing for this, and a lot of them have talked about bringing that discourse and not let the issues overtake what we're trying to do instead of conversing with one another. Listen to one another and not just shoot each other down. How do we listen and dialogue? And that's very good. With your studies in communication and leadership over the years, what are some of the major similarities and differences do you feel between communication and leadership?
Well, leadership is very complicated. There's a lot of ramifications. Leadership is often distilled. In other words, a senior pastor has a group of elders and he has to answer to the elders. Biola University, I have a chair, an associate dean, a provost, the president, the board of directors. So you can't just run out and do whatever you want to do. A good leader is going to have to build coalitions. And those coalitions, depending on how big the organization is, right? You have to bring people along with you. Very few organizations, unless you're Steve Jobs, unless where you can just call the shots and you don't have to form a coalition of people. So leadership is really bridge building with fellow leaders within an organization and convincing the top to do certain things. And in today's climate, I can do something with the Winsome Conviction Project. It gets put on social media. Now, Biola has to deal with the ramifications that you've got a comm professor arguing that we should consider in certain situations using preferred pronouns, right? Now that affects all of us. And so you just have to be very savvy in today's world of bringing along people, explaining your reasoning, being willing to compromise and to say, okay, that might be a bridge too far now. I hope it won't be in a year or two. But right now, I'll concede that for all my constituents, this is probably a bridge too far to go this direction.
And so looking back a little bit in some of your writings, even so you look today and you have all these other projects you've been working on. Heading back in 2010, you wrote a book called Authentic Communication, Christian Speech, Engaging Culture. How does one best lead, whether from the principles that you learned when you wrote the book or now several years later? How does one best lead using authentic communication?
So we'd have to define authentic communication. By the way, that was the second book in an academic series, which just gives you freedom to go deeper. Like when it's an academic publication, you go into detail, specificity that a popular book would never let you do. And that opens you up to criticism, by the way, because scholars will look at popular books and say, why didn't you cover this, this, and this? And it's like, because it wasn't written for you, it was written for the popular audience. You have to have thick skin if you're an academic writing popular books. But I would say authentic communication is a two-way street, not a one-way street. So there are for sure monologues where all I really want to do is state my position and set you straight. I'm really not open for your perspective. I just want you to listen to mine. And in today's cancel culture, my latest book is End the Stalemate, moving from cancel culture to meaningful conversations. Some would say, I not only want you to listen to my perspective, I want to cancel yours and not give it a platform within this church, organization, or community. Christians don't like this. They do not like the two-way nature of it. Like, I'm willing to meet with a Muslim and I'm willing to share the gospel, but I'm not willing to listen to a Muslim present their view of Allah to me. I'm asking him to be open-minded, but I'm not open-minded. That's a dance that we're going to have to learn how to negotiate as we seek to have conversations, not only outside the church, but inside the church. When you talk about mask mandates, how we're going to vote in the upcoming election, are these two-way conversations or just my tribe wants to set your tribe straight?
And that's a good point. My next question then to you would be, I know some people would like to say that, cancel culture is kind of ending. We're kind of like more in this plural state of somewhat understanding, but still having your own opinions, and that's fine. It sounds like you're arguing that cancel culture is still really prevalent, whether we want to say it is or not. Is that right?
Oh, without a doubt. So this book just came out a month ago. Every conservative radio program I'm on wants to say this: don't you hate it when progressives cancel? And I want to say, yes, 100%. Yes, but conservatives do it too. Let me give you one example. Alistair Begg, he's been preaching for 30 years. You can't find a more trusted conservative biblical voice. We actually had the co-host of his radio program on our podcast, the Winsome Conviction podcast, and he was asked the question by a grandmother who has a granddaughter who's transitioning, getting married, and the question was, should I attend her wedding? So Alistair Begg said, does she know your biblical position on this? And the grandmother said, yes, of course she does. He goes, then I would go to the wedding. I would show love to her because you're not compromising your biblical view, but you're showing love. Austin, he was canceled by 180 Christian radio stations for that answer. Is cancel culture still here? Oh my goodness. I would say it's become the default move both within conservative circles and liberal circles, and the conservatives will get mad at me for lumping us in the same boat.
I think sometimes it's wishful thinking to say that we've moved on from that. I think we just accepted more that that's the culture. I love what you're saying of how do we change that into meaningful discussion. As you've went through your doctorate studies and even in your own self-scholarly studies, who are some of the scholarly giants or some of the individuals who you most enjoyed studying as you progress in your educational background?
Oh, love this question, Austin. We actually dedicate a whole chapter to it in the book, and this Dalmeda, who's your Mount Rushmore of trusted perspectives. So without a doubt, here's mine. Dr. Julia Wood was my thesis director and dissertation director. She's one of the top gender theorists in the entire world. Her book, Gender, Culture, and Communication, absolutely blew my mind. I don't agree with everything she says. She's not a Christian, but deeply respect her take, the complexity of how she views things. I would say anything written by the Harvard Negotiation Project needs to be standard reading. And by the way, thank goodness they've started to write popular books. So getting to yes, getting past no, difficult conversations has to be on everybody's bookshelf. They're brilliant. Let me mention one that's going to cause a little bit of problems, Michel Foucault. We had a Foucault scholar come to Biola University. Foucault is the most quoted scholar in the last 100 years, beating out everybody. Freud, Einstein, and yet most Christians have never read Foucault, and Foucault's cultural analysis is brilliant. I ultimately disagree with Foucault's. He doesn't believe in absolute truth, but man, his cultural analysis, I think, is absolutely fascinating. I'd say Michael Eric Dyson at UNC Chapel Hill blew my mind in his book Between God and Gangster Rap. Then I would say, I'm a huge C.S. Lewis fan. I think Lewis was just brilliant in how do you package this so that non-Christians can consider it. So those would be the individuals that I look to and think that they're just brilliant in thinking about the content and relational level of communication.
Do you think there's anyone that you can think of in the public sphere today, whether it's through journalism or broadcast or even just celebrities or just well-known people? Is there anyone in your mind that's practicing this understanding of trying to connect and build bridges within communication?
Yeah, we just lost the best, Tim Keller. We literally just lost the best. He has a podcast called Questioning Christianity that I play for my students as a brilliant example of somebody respecting the person that they disagree with. I would put Richard Mao in that group. Uncommon Decency is one of the marvelous books that really shapes my thinking about civility and speaking truth. So I would broaden that a little bit, Austin.
Go ahead.
I think the He Gets Us campaign that Ed Stetzer, the dean of our Talbot School of Theology, is the theological consultant, I think is brilliant. And I show it to all my rhetoric classes. We just happen to have the theological consultant for The Chosen, Doug Huffman. It reads every script, and along with a Muslim and a Jewish scholar, they read every script off. I think The Chosen is one of the most brilliant portrayals of Jesus I've ever seen. And I think the He Gets Us campaign, though controversial, surprises us with Jesus. And I think, hey, you get high marks for surprising us about Jesus and his thoughts. So I'm more and more, Austin, in the camp of we need the arts more than ever before to get past what C.S. Lewis called the watchful dragons of our defenses.
Elaborate more, if you don't mind. What elements of the arts do we need for there to be successful dialogue?
Okay, so I'm trying to think of how controversial I want to be. We are not known for good art. We're all known for bad art. We are known for stereotypic portrayals of both Christians and non-Christians. I won't mention any names, though I desperately want to. I want to surprise people. I want to invoke abnormal communication. That's Richard Rorty's concept. I want people to be surprised that Christians are much more complex than they thought. Jesus is much more complex than you thought. You think you have him pegged, but here's how Jesus would handle the trans community. Here's how Jesus would step into race conversations. That's the He Gets Us campaign. People are so inoculated today. This is what we call my side bias. They're so inoculated that a straight transmission view, which is let me present my top 5 arguments, people are inoculated against it and they're not going to consider it. This is tribalism today. So art gets you to think about things that you normally wouldn't think about and even laugh at. I'm thinking of Modern Family here, which is brilliantly done. And I remember watching the first episode for a rhetoric class, laughing out loud as I'm being sold the normalization of gay lifestyle. I'm literally laughing out loud. If you would have presented that to me in a speech, a book, I would reject it out of hand, but I'm laughing like everybody else with Modern Family thinking this is really good stuff.
Yeah, that really is a really good depiction of that. I think that's a great illustration because I'm in a very similar boat as you. I watched that show and really enjoyed it, and I wouldn't have thought of it being that enjoyable, but there we are. And so certainly something to think through that. You spent some time in your studies, of course, at public institutions like North Carolina, private liberal arts institutions, CCCU schools. What are some of the unique characteristics of being an educational leader within a small liberal arts school that one can't really experience in a different setting?
So I go back to UNC Chapel Hill's D1, Division 1, which means the research one. So you get a pretty narrow research agenda. It has to be high academic. You publish only in the high academic journals. You go to conferences, you present. There's very little toleration for the Winsome Conviction podcast. But you go to a small Christian school, one, collaboration is everywhere. We all know each other. And so I've collaborated a bunch with faculty. There's limited resources, but you have access to the president. I mean, think about that. I'm at UNC Chapel Hill. Nobody's going to see the chancellor. Nobody's going to see the president. But at Biola University, I can set up a coffee meeting with him. And we can go to Heritage, which is a baseball throw away from his office. We can sit and have coffee. That's pretty remarkable. And the provost, I can pop in on the provost and just say, hey, here's an idea I want to kick around. He'll listen to it. UNC Chapel Hill, you're just not getting those meetings very easily. The smaller the school, the less the resources, for sure. I mean, I'd love to have the endowment of UNC Chapel Hill. But a smaller school, you can meet with people, you run into each other, you collaborate a lot. And that's what I love about being at a smaller school.
Now, how much would you say, I know you've expressed this, but how much would you say actually being at a Christian institution really is helpful in how you present the message that you're presenting? Like, in other words, like, can you even be remotely close to what you're doing now at, say, even a small liberal arts secular school?
Oh, I think the answer is yes, but you have to know what you're stepping into. Like, Biola has been around since 1908. We're the home of the fundamentals. So Biola is in the conservative end of the swimming pool. You can reach out and be provocative, but there's a ceiling on that provocativeness. I sign the doctrinal statement every year, rightfully so. And if you violate a confessional school, you're no longer employed, rightfully so. And then, when you do something at a small school, everybody gets impacted by the wake behind you. So I would say people would probably peg me on Muehlhoff is center-leaning left. But honestly, Austin, left at Biola?
Yeah.
Berkeley would laugh at left at Biola. Dude, you're alt-conservative. But at Biola and within conservative Christian churches, I can be seen as center-leaning left. And some are not pleased with that. And I have no doubt that I've added to the headache of our PR department where they say Biola's woke because what I just listened to Muehlhoff do trying to bridge build seemed pretty woke to me.
One thing I've been researching a little bit here in the early stages, I'm in my literature review stage. And so I'm kind of starting to think through a few topics. And one of those elements is within communication. And one of the ideas I'm really fascinated with is how important nonverbal communication is in terms of communication and how we relate to one another. And so even in the midst of all these dialogues and all these other things of the sort, do you think nonverbal communication is as important as actually what is being spoken, or should it be still secondary to what's actually being spoken?
So I would say in the age of Zoom, I mean, look at what we're doing right now. Now, you're just doing the audio part of this, but I would say 90% of all the interviews I've done for the release of the book have been exactly like this, where an audience looks at me 24/7 as I give my answer. So I think nonverbal communication is the great wild card of communication, because how you interpret my nonverbals is a wild card. And to be honest, Austin, most of us have no idea what our nonverbals are like. Very few of us do what we're doing right now, where I actually get to go back and watch myself and see how my nonverbals might be augmenting or contradicting my verbal message. So I think in today's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, the facial expressions of people, how they present themselves is incredibly important. And we've always known nonverbal communication is extremely important. I don't think you can separate it from the message unless you're doing purely written style and things like that. So yeah, it's going to be with us forever. And we're in a very visual age today, so we better learn how to negotiate it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the blessings of me initially having my career pursuit being in sports communications, is that you want to go back and listen to yourself all the time and see, okay, am I speaking too fast? How am I presenting this? And so that's very, very important. Christian higher ed has obviously been a significant change in the landscape over the last 15, 20 years. Obviously, there's some schools that are riding this pretty well. Other schools, unfortunately, have had to close due to financial woes. So with that in mind, how can Christian education leaders best utilize effective communication as they navigate specific challenges that these schools might face?
Well, I can mostly speak from the California context. So liberal arts is in trouble. Unfortunately, it's dying. The perceived value of a liberal arts education, unfortunately, is really low. Add to that, the cost of private Christian colleges and university tends to be pretty high. So I think people don't see the value because they want to go in and come out with a job, and I don't want to have a ton of debt. That's a pretty difficult thing to manage. I do think what Biola tends to try to do is to say, we pick your minor, which means you're a Bible minor. So you're going to spend 4 years studying the Bible. And I think that parents want their kids to be rooted and grounded in the scriptures. So I think that's our calling card, is you're going to get integration in a Christian liberal arts education. We're going to take a look at what the scriptures say, as well as current research in psychology, comm theory, philosophy, but we integrate it with what we think is God's word. Obviously, every school has a perspective. But that to me is, you either like the integration idea and that's enough to probably go into debt, or it's just not enough and I'm going to go knock this out at a JC or knock it out at a secular school and just join a good Christian church or a good Christian organization that can help me process.
So would that be safe to say then that if someone is looking, I'm not saying this is wrong, but if someone is just looking to go career-minded, in and out, input, output, that they're looking for more of a transactional vocational experience as opposed to a transformational vocational experience if you were to indulge in liberal arts?
Yeah. So if you look at the majors that are doing really well at Biola University, what do you got? You got nursing program is one of the top rated programs. Rosemead School of Psychology, because you'll go on and get your clinical work. CMA, our Center for Media Arts, we're right here at Los Angeles. So our students graduate as filmmakers, and guess what? They get internships and jobs. Our business school is thriving. But all that to say, when you come in, you see where you're going to come out. If you come in business and you're an accounting major, well, guess what? You're going to law school, or you're going to work for a Fortune 500 company or a lesser company. If you're a nurse, our nursing program's really highly rated. You're going to get a job in nursing. My son was kinesiology. He's now a physical therapist. But the liberal arts is I was an English major. Okay, you're probably going to be a teacher. I'm a comm major. Well, I'm not quite sure what you're going to do. There's not an easy on-ramp, but I think the major is incredibly important. So I think probably a Christian school is a microcosm of many schools that the functional majors that you see the easy on-ramp to a career are doing well.
A big thank you to Tim Muehlhoff for joining us today as the fourth guest of the Educational Leadership and Communication mini-series on the Minds of Meaning podcast. There's so much to gather here within this conversation, but here are my big three takeaways. First, he talked about how cancel culture is still alive and well, which I was surprised to hear. But when he framed it in the perspective that he did, I realized that those who have the mindset of cancel culture is over have to realize that the world is simply accepting the fact that people have major differences and diverse thoughts are not often being communicated in dialogue. As an educational leader, I have the opportunity to invite students to research why that is and see how the next generation of students can help turn the tide in engaging with those who are unlike us. Second, I knew that facial expressions of how one expresses themselves is incredibly important, but Dr. Muehlhoff pointed out a big reason why it is important today more than it ever has been. He noted that it is because of the constant exposure that we have in social media and digital circles is the reason why it is very important. And I think it's completely true. People on social media and digital technology are constantly looking towards any minuscule insight of nonverbal communication to see if there is a hidden message. And so to be fully present and aware of communication situation in 2024 is very important. Third, it is sad that the traditional educational model of liberal arts is dying, quote unquote, as Dr. Muehlhoff mentions. However, I think it is encouraging to know that those of us in education have the opportunity to encourage those who are in transactional majors to seek how they can be transformational in their education experiences. It's a tall task, but hopefully, as my employer at Judson University says, we educators can continue to be motivated to change lives that change the world. Thank you for listening to the fourth episode of the Education, Leadership, and Communication series on the Minds of Meaning podcast. I am Austin Anderson saying so long.
Thank you for listening to the Minds of Meaning podcast. To learn more about Minds of Meaning, visit mindsofmeaning.com or Minds of Meaning on the mainstream social media platforms. God bless.